I had learned in the years after she left to stop looking north at dusk. I never once managed it. Every evening the light in my great hall at Thornhollow went the color of a cooling forge, and every evening my gaze drifted to the tall north window as if some hand at my collar turned my head for me. My counsel thought it a king's habit of watching the border. It was not the border. It was a direction, and a woman had walked out of my life along it, and some part of me had gone with her and never come back to tell me where. They called me a good king in those years. I believe I was. I mended the roads the old wars had broken. I fed the far villages through 2 hard winters. I sat in judgment and gave more than I took, and the Silvermark grew quiet and fat and safe under my hand. My wolf ran the ridgelines at the full moon with the pack at my flank, and the pack was strong. By every measure a man counts his life, I had built well. And I was hollow as a struck bell. I want you to understand that plainly, because everything I did after came out of that hollowness, and a hollow man is easy to lead by the nose if you know where his hollow is. Someone had known exactly where mine was. It took me far too long to learn it. Her name was Sorrel. She was a healer, and she had no rank at all, which in the reckoning of my court was the same as being no one. She came to Thornhollow the year the coughing sickness swept the low villages and my own physicians shut themselves in their rooms and burned herbs and prayed. And she came without being sent for, on a farm cart, with a satchel of roots and a plain face, and a way of looking at a dying child as if the child were a king and she the servant. She did not lose one of them, not one. When the sickness broke, my steward tried to pay her and send her home, and she took the coin because she was not a fool, and she stayed because I asked her to, and I asked her to stay because the first time she looked at me, not at the Alpha King, at me, the tired man under the crown, something behind my sternum came alive that I had thought long dead. I will not pretend I understood it at first. I had ruled a decade without a mate. My council had brought me daughters of allied packs, elegant women in silver and gray, and I had been courteous to all of them and moved by none. I had decided the fated bond the old wives spoke of was a story to comfort the young, and that I would take a wife of policy in my own good time and do my duty by her and the line. I was a practical man. And then a healer with dirt under her nails sat across a sick room from me at midnight and asked me, quietly, whether I ate enough, given how thin I'd grown, and the bond took hold of me like a hand closing gently around my heart, and I understood I had been wrong about everything. We had one summer. I will keep most of it to myself because it is mine, but I will tell you this much. I have ruled, and I have won wars, and I have stood in the moonlight while 1,000 wolves bowed to me, and none of it ever made me feel as much a king as walking the orchard paths of Thornhollow at dusk with Sorrel's hand in mine while she named every herb along the wall, and I pretended I didn't already know them just to keep her talking. She healed the pack. She healed the town. She healed, I think, some broken thing in me that no physician had a name for. And I let myself believe, for one summer, that a king could simply choose the woman his blood had chosen, and the world would make room. The world did not make room. My father made sure of that, even from his grave. He had been dead 2 years by then, but he had left an oath behind him, and oaths outlive the men who swear them. In the last hard year of his life, to end a border war that was bleeding the Silvermark white, my father had pledged the Pax Alpha, me, to a marriage alliance with the great river pack of Drenar. Their strength for our peace, a daughter of their line for my hand. It was sealed in blood and witnessed by both Pax elders, and my father died believing he had bought his son a kingdom's safety at the small price of his son's heart. He was not a cruel man. He simply came from a time when a king's heart was reckoned a small price, and no one had ever taught him otherwise. I might have found a way through it even so. Oaths can be renegotiated. Drenar might have taken gold or a lesser tie or a season's patience. I have unmade harder knots since, but I did not get the chance to try because a man at my own council table made very certain the knot pulled tight before I could reach it. His name was Caddock. He had been my father's regent through my boyhood and my chief counselor since, and I trusted him the way you trust the beam over your head, without ever once looking up at it. He was clever and tireless, and he loved the Silvermark. I truly believe he did, in the way a man loves a thing he has decided he alone knows how to keep. And Caddock had decided, long before I understood my own heart, that a healer with no rank would be the ruin of the alliance that kept the peace, and that it fell to him to prevent it. He never raised his voice. He never once spoke against her to my face. He was far too clever for that, He simply arranged the pieces on the board so that, when the moment came, I would move exactly as he wished and believe the move my own. The moment came at the Autumn Council, when the elders of Drenar arrived to fix the wedding date, and Caddoc laid before the full hall the treaty in my father's own hand, and the witness marks of 2 pacts, and quietly, gravely, as a loyal man forced to a hard duty, the plain fact that if the Alpha King broke a blood-sworn alliance for the sake of a common healer, Drenar would take it as insult. The border war would reopen, and the villages I had spent 2 years mending would burn. He did not have to say Sorrel's name. He let the hall say it for him, in the silence, in the sidelong looks. He made my love a threat to every child I had saved from the coughing sickness. He made keeping her the selfish act of a small man and letting her go the sacrifice of a great one. And I hollow where my judgment should have been, young in the crown, still half believing that a king's heart was a small price. I let him. I have gone over that night 10,000 times. I have imagined every word I might have said and did not. What I did say to Sorrel in the cold hour before dawn at the postern gate was that I had no choice, that the alliance held the peace, that I would see her provided for honorably always, that I was sorry. I said the word choice as if it were an iron wall between us, and not simply the thing I was too worn and too well managed to fight for. She did not weep and beg. That is the part that has flayed me every night since, because it would have been easier if she had. She stood very straight in the gate torch light with her satchel on her shoulder, the same satchel she'd come with, and she looked at me the way she had looked at the dying children, steadily, without flinching from the truth of it, and she said, "You have a choice, Wreath. You are choosing. Be honest enough to know that much." And then her composure broke, all at once and only for a moment, and 2 tears went down her face and caught the torchlight, and she turned before I could see a third, and she walked out through my gate into the dark. I let her go. Gods forgive me, I stood in my own gate and let her go, and I told myself it was the peace, and I never knew, this is the thing. This is the wound under all the other wounds. I never knew it was the last time. I thought there would be a mending someday. I thought grief was a wide, slow river you crossed eventually to the other bank. I did not know I was watching the last of her, and that a small figure walking north into the dark was carrying away, in her body, in a secret she would not shame herself by using to hold a man who would not hold her, my child. Caddoc, of course, made certain I never learned it, but I am ahead of myself. The alliance with Drenar fell apart within the year, not from war, but from the simplest of causes. The daughter I had been pledged to had loved a captain of her own pack since girlhood, and once she saw a king willing to gut himself for policy, she found the courage to refuse the match and wed where her own heart pointed. Drenar, it turned out, had never wanted the marriage half so much as its counselors. A trade pact served the peace just as well, and was signed with handshakes and no blood at all. So I gave up Sorrel for an alliance that a braver woman than I dissolved in a season by the plain act of choosing her own life. I could have looked for her then. I did send word, quiet inquiries to the low villages to the healer's roads. Every inquiry came back empty. She had gone, they said. Gone north, gone to the coast, gone somewhere past the edge of my knowing. I told myself she wanted it so, and that I owed her that much, and that a man who had let her walk out his gate had forfeited the right to hunt her down and disturb whatever peace she had found. It was a coward's mercy dressed as a kind one, and I wore it for years, and I turned north at dusk. And I did not know that half the reason my inquiries died on the road was that Caddoc read every one of them before it left the hold, and made very sure the road stayed quiet. I learned all of that later. What set me on the road to learning it was not cleverness on my part, it was a herring tax. The storm coast of Graymere lies at the wild northern edge of the Silvermark, a 2-week ride from Thornhollow through the pine country, and I confess I had let it govern itself for years, being far and poor and troublesome. That autumn its village headman sent a grievance to my council. My northern reeve, they said, was taxing their catch beyond all custom and pocketing the difference, and men were going hungry over it, and would the Alpha King please remember that Graymere was his too? It was exactly the sort of matter a king can send a deputy to settle. Caddoc, in fact, advised me to send a deputy. He advised it rather firmly now that I look back on it, and grew unusually particular about which deputy, and it was that faint overeagerness, I could not have named it at the time, that made me, on nothing but a tired man's contrariness, decide to ride north myself. I have thanked that herring tax on my knees since. It was the one string of Caddoc's whole long weaving that he could not pull, because he could not tell a king not to go and see his own suffering people without looking like exactly what he was. So I rode north with a small guard, through the reddening pine country, and the farther north we went the more that hand at my collar turned my head, until on the last day, coming down the cliff road with the gray sea opening below us and the wind full of salt and cold, the pull behind my sternum was so strong and so strange that I reined in without meaning to, and sat my horse staring at a fishing village I had never seen, and could not for my life have told you why my heart was slamming like a war drum. I had felt that pull, faint and dying, every dusk for 6 years. I had called it grief and learned to live beside it. I did not yet understand that grief does not grow stronger as you ride toward a place. Only a living thing does that, only a thread with something still tied to the far end. Graymere in those years was a hard, honest little place, gray stone houses set with their backs to the wind, boats drawn up on a shingle beach, nets drying on frames, and above it all a bluff where someone had planted, against all the sea wind's wishes, a garden. I noticed the garden before I noticed anything else, because it had no business surviving there and it was thriving. Herbs in banked rows, sheltered by a low dry stone wall, ordered and living and green against the gray. Something in me went very quiet at the sight of it, the way a man goes quiet at a smell from his childhood before he can place it. We rode down into the village, and the people came out warily, as folk do when armed riders come, and then more warily still when the eldest among them recognized the wolf sigil on my cloak and understood who had come. I had meant to see the reeve first, to hear the tax grievance, to do the kingly thing I had ridden 2 weeks to do. I never got to the reeve that day, because as I swung down from my horse at the head of the beach, a child broke from the knot of villagers and marched straight up to me. A boy, perhaps 6 years old, dark-haired, sturdy, entirely unafraid in the way only a child who has never had reason to fear can be, and planted himself in front of me with his small fists at his sides, and looked up at me with a scowl of ferocious concentration. My guard tensed. I raised a hand to still them. Something about the boy had stopped the breath in my body, and I did not yet know what. "Are you the Alpha King?" he demanded. "I am," I said. He studied me a moment longer, and his scowl deepened as if he were checking my face against some picture he carried. And then he asked me the question that split my life cleanly into the years before it and the years after. "Are you my father's?" The beach went silent. Even the gulls seemed to hush. I remember the wind and the smell of salt and tar and the exact gray of the sea, because the moment burned itself into me whole. I looked down into that small, fierce face, and the bond behind my sternum, the thing I had called grief for 6 years, pulled so hard and so suddenly that I actually put a hand to my own chest, because I understood all at once and past any possibility of doubt that the thread had never been tied only to a woman. It had 2 ends on the far side of it. It had, this whole time, been tied to a woman and to a child, and it had been trying to pull me north to them every dusk for 6 years while I stood in my hall and called it sorrow and looked away. And then a shadow fell across the boy, and a hand came down gently on his shoulder, and a voice I had heard in my dreams 6 years running said, low and level and utterly steady, "Bram, come away from the horse." I looked up, and it was Sorrel. She had changed, and she had not. The years had marked her, a weathering at the eyes, a few threads of gray, a strength in her hands and shoulders that came from 6 years of hauling herbs and hauling the boy and hauling, I would learn, half of Graymere back from the edge of one hardship or another. But it was her. Her plain, unbeautiful, wholly beautiful face, the steadiness, the way she looked at me, not at the crown, at me, and this time there was no wonder in it and no summer in it. There was a wall in it, built high and well over 6 years, and behind the wall, guarded, a wariness that was almost fear, and it was not fear of me. It was fear for the boy standing between us with his fist still balled. "Sorrel," I said, it came out cracked. "Your Grace," she said, and the formality of it was a door shutting. Bram looked from her to me and back, his certainty faltering for the first time. "You said," he began, and there was a wobble in his fierce little voice now, "you said my father was a great man in the South. You said he had wolves." "He has wolves." He pointed at my guard, at the gray pelts of the 2 pack wolves that had loped down the cliff road at my flank and now sat, incongruously gentle, at the edge of the beach. "Is it him or isn't it? I have faced down armies. I have stood over the bodies of men I killed and men I could not save. I had never in my life been as afraid as I was in the moment before Sorrel answered her son, because I understood that whatever she said next she was saying to protect him, and that she had every right in the world to lie, and that if she lied, I would deserve it and it would end me. She knelt down to Bram's height. She did not look at me. She looked at her son, and she smoothed his hair, and she said with a gentleness that undid me completely, "Yes, that's your father. That's the king. Now go and find Elsa and stay in the cottage until I come for you, and take the little wolf carving so you have something to hold. Go on." Bram did not go on. He looked up at me with his whole small history in his face, the picture he'd carried, the tale he'd been told, the father who was a great man in the south with wolves. And I saw the moment the picture and the man met and did not match, because the man in front of him was not standing tall and glad. The man in front of him was a king with tears on his face, and no child expects to make a king cry. "Why is he sad?" Bram asked his mother, in a whisper that carried across the whole silent beach. And Sorrel, still not looking at me, said quietly, "Because he didn't know about you. And now he does. I want to tell you that I did the right thing next, and I did not quite. I did the human thing. I knelt down on the wet shingle in front of my son, 6 years old, and I had never held him, never named him, never known his name until a minute passed, and I did not reach for him because I had not earned the right to reach for him, but I looked at him at his own height, and I said, 'Your mother is right. I didn't know.' If I had known, boy Bram, I would have crossed the whole Silvermark on foot. There is no wolf in my pack that runs as fast as I would have run. I am sorry that I am late. I am 6 years late, and I am sorry." He considered this with enormous seriousness. Then he said, "Do you really have 100 wolves?" "More than 100, I said. "Can I see them?" "Bram," Sorrel said. "Someday," I told him. "If your mother allows it, everything now is as your mother allows it. Do you understand me? Everything." I said the last of it to Bram, but I said it to Sorrel, and I saw her hear it. I saw the wall shift just slightly at the base, not fall, only shift, the way a stone settles. 6 years too late, I had finally understood the thing she had told me at the gate. You are choosing. And I was choosing at last, the only thing worth choosing, and I was announcing to the whole beach that the choosing from here belonged to her. She sent the boy up to the cottage with a wide-eyed neighbor woman, and she walked with me apart from the guard, along the shingle to where the boats were drawn up. And there in the wind she told me the 6 years I had missed, in a voice with no self-pity in it at all, which somehow made every word land twice as hard. She had known she carried the child within a month of leaving Thornhollow. She had been on the Healer's Road by then, going north, and she had made a decision that I have never once been able to fault her for, though it cost me my son's first 6 years. She had decided she would not use the child to bind a man who had let her walk out his gate for the sake of an alliance. "If you would not keep me for myself," she said, plainly, looking at the sea and not at me, "I would not have you keep me for a swelling belly. I would not spend the rest of my life watching you honor an obligation. Bram deserved a father who wanted to be his father, not one who was trapped into it. I would rather raise him alone and proud than raise him beside a cage." I could not speak, she went on. She had come to Graymere because it was far and poor, and needed a healer badly enough not to ask questions of one who arrived without a history. She had borne Bram in a fisherman's cottage in a winter storm with 2 village women for midwives, and she had named him, and she had raised him, and she had made herself indispensable to that whole hard coast one saved life at a time, the way she had once made herself indispensable to me. When the fevers came, she was there. When the boats came in broken, she set the bones. When old Graymere widows died, she sat with them so they would not die alone. They loved her on that coast. I saw it in every face on the beach, the way they had closed around her, and the boy when armed southern riders came, ready to stand between their healer and a king. She had lost a court and won a coast. She had walked out of my gate with a satchel and built, from nothing in the teeth of the sea wind, a life that thrived, that garden on the bluff that had no business surviving and survived anyway. She was that garden. She always had been. "I sent you word once," she said then, and it was the only time her voice roughened. "In the 2nd year, Bram was walking and saying words, and one night he asked me where his father was, and I weakened. I told myself you had a right to know he lived, whatever you did with it. So I wrote it down, everything, and I paid a merchant going south to carry it to the hold and put it in the king's own hand, and I paid him well, and I waited." She looked at me for the first time in a long while, and there was an old grief in it, long scarred over. "You never answered. I decided you had read it and chosen the alliance a 2nd time. It near broke what the first time hadn't. And then I decided I would never again put my son's heart or my own into a letter carried south. So I stopped, and here we are. And that letter is where the last piece fell into place. and where the cold anger I had been holding down all through her telling finally rose in me, because I knew, with the certainty of a man who has just seen the whole shape of a thing, exactly what had happened to that letter, and exactly whose hand had taken it. I had never received it. I would remember to my dying day every scrap of news that came from the North in those years, because I hungered for it. No letter from Sorrel had ever reached me. But every road south passed through channels Caddoc controlled, and every message to the king crossed Caddoc's desk before it crossed mine, and Caddoc had spent a decade making certain the healer never troubled the Silvermark again. He had not merely engineered the parting. He had murdered the mending. He had taken a letter that would have brought me north 6 years sooner, that would have given me my son from his walking days, that would have ended both our griefs, and he had burned it or buried it, and let a woman on the coast believe her child's father had read of the boy's existence and turned away. I told Sorrel this. I told her about Caddoc, the treaty laid so cunningly, the silence bought, the roads kept quiet, and now the letter. I watched her take it in. I braced for her to disbelieve me, or worse, to believe me and hate me anyway, because the fault was mine at the root of it. Caddoc had only ever been able to move me because I had let him, because I had been a hollow, well-managed man who took the coward's path and called it duty. No schemer can lead a king who will not be led. That was mine to carry, and I did not try to set it down. But Sorrel, when the whole shape of it settled in her, did a thing I did not expect. She laughed, a short, disbelieving, terrible laugh, and then she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, and when she took it away her eyes were wet and furious, and somewhere under the fury unclenching. 6 years, she said. 6 years I thought you read my letter and chose the treaty. 6 years I hated you for a thing you never did. She turned away and looked at the sea a long moment, mastering herself, and when she turned back the wall behind her eyes had not fallen. I want to be honest, it had not fallen, but there was a gate in it now, and the gate was not barred. It changes nothing about the first time, she said. You still let me walk out that gate, Wreath? That was yours. No counselor did that. No, I said. That was mine. I will not pretend otherwise to you of all people. I let you go and called it a choice I didn't have, and you told me to my face it was a choice, and you were right, and it took me 6 years and my own son on a beach to become a man honest enough to say so. I have no defense. I have only this, I know it now. And I am not asking you to forgive the man at the gate. I am asking you to let the man on the beach try to earn what that man threw away. On your terms, at your pace. And if the answer is that I earn it and you still say no, then I will build Bram a place in my line and my heart, and I will ride north to see him every season of my life, and I will never once ask you for more than you wish to give. That is my oath, and unlike my father's, I mean to keep this one to the last day I breathe. I stayed on that coast a month. I will not pretend it was a smooth month, or that a wall 6 years in the building came down in a season, because it did not, and I would not trust it if it had. Sorrel gave me nothing I did not earn, and she was right to. I settled the herring tax the second day. The reeve had indeed been robbing them, and I broke him from his office and set an honest man in his place and cut Graymere's levy by half and put the difference into a new well and a new boat. And I did it not to buy the village's goodwill, though it bought it, but because it was 6 years overdue and mine to do. I mended what I had neglected. That was the first thing. The second thing was Bram, and Bram I did not have to earn, because a boy of 6 who has spent his life hearing that his father is a great man in the south with 100 wolves, is a boy prepared to love his father on very short notice, if his father will only show up and be worth it. I tried, every day, to be worth it. I did not shower him with a king's gifts, which would have been easy and meant nothing. I sat with him on the shingle and let him show me his tide pools. I let the pack wolves lie down beside him on the beach, and when the great gray female, who had let no child near her in years, put her head in his lap and sighed, and Bram looked up at me with his whole face lit like the sun coming through storm cloud. I understood that the bond ran in him too, that my son had my blood and my pack's blood, and that he had been calling those wolves north his whole small life without knowing it, the same as I had. I taught him the names of the herbs on the bluff, and discovered he already knew them because his mother had taught him, and the finding of that she had raised our son in the very knowledge she had once used to charm a king in a sick room, undid me quietly on the bluff in the wind more than once. And the third thing, the slowest and the truest, was Sorrel herself. I courted her the way I should have had the courage to fight for her the first time, plainly, patiently, asking nothing present. I walked with her on her rounds and carried her satchel and learned the names on that coast and the troubles behind them. I saw her set a fisherman's shattered arm, and I held the man still and did as she told me. A king taking orders from a healer with dirt under her nails, and I was more content in that cottage doing her bidding than I had ever been on my throne. Some evenings she spoke to me. Some evenings she did not, and I did not press, and I rode back to the inn and turned my face to her cottage the way I had turned north for 6 years, and I waited. And I did not consider the waiting a hardship, because for the first time in 6 years, the thing behind my sternum was not grief. It was hope, tied at both ends to something living, and pulling me not away into the dark, but toward a warm window on a bluff. Caddock I dealt with when I returned south, and I will tell you how, because it matters to the kind of king the whole business made me. I did not kill him. It would have been easy, and I confess the wish was in me, standing in my own council chamber with the whole shape of his long treachery laid bare, the treaty timed, the roads kept quiet, the letter that I made him admit at last he had burned. He did not deny it when I put it to him with the evidence in my hand. He was too proud in the end to deny it. He told me, still believing it, that he had saved the Silvermark from a king ruled by his heart, that he had kept the peace, that a common healer would have been the ruin of the line, and he had done what my father would have wished, and what I had not the wisdom to do myself. He said it to my face, in front of the assembled council, an old man who had spent 40 years certain he alone knew how to keep the kingdom, and who had burned my son's first 6 years to keep it. And I found, looking at him, that I did not want his death. His death would have made him a martyr to his own certainty and taught the pack nothing. So I stripped him of his office and his seat and his authority before the whole council, and I named his crime plainly so that no one could pretend it a loyalty, that he had deceived his king, severed a true bond, and hidden the existence of an heir of the Silvermark. And then I did not cast him into a cell or into the snow. I settled on him a modest holding in the quiet southern hills, with an income sufficient to live out his years in dignity, and I bound him never again to set foot in Thornhollow or hold any office in the pack, and I let him go to it alive. Mercy, I have come to think, is not the absence of justice. It is justice with the cruelty left out. I named what he had done, I ended his power to do it again, and I spared his life, and I have never regretted it. He lived out his years in those hills, I am told, and grew old, and never once, to the end, understood that the kingdom he had spent 40 years keeping had been made poorer, not safer, by the very thing he was proudest of. That was punishment enough. There is no lonelier man than the one who cannot see why he is alone. Sorrel did not come south that first year, nor the second, and I did not ask her to. I went north instead, every season, as I had sworn, through the pine country to the storm coast, to a cottage on a bluff and a garden that thrived where nothing should. I watched my son grow. I watched a wall come down one settled stone at a time, not because I pushed it, but because I stopped being the man who had built it and stayed stopped, season after season, until she believed the change was real, because it was. It was Bram, in the end, who opened the last door the way he had opened the first. It was the 3rd autumn, and I was leaving after my season on the coast, and Bram, grown taller, sturdier, wolf-eyed, stood on the shingle where he had first marched up to me and demanded to know if I was his father, and he did not want me to go. And he turned to his mother, and with the terrible plain honesty of a child, he asked her the question that all my patience and all her healing years had circled without landing. Why can't we just go with him? Why do we live where it's cold when he has a whole warm kingdom? Don't you love him? He loves you. Everyone can see it. Why is it hard? And Sorrel looked at me over our son's head, across that gray beach where I had lost her and found her, and I watched her decide to stop making it hard. Not because a child had shamed her into it, she was past shaming, she had earned the right to make any man wait a lifetime, but because she had at last, over 3 patient years, come to believe the answer to Bram's other question. He loves you. Everyone can see it. She had needed to be sure. She had every right in the world to need to be sure, and she was finally sure. She did not run into my arms. That was never her way, and I would not have believed it if she had. She walked to me across the shingle at her own pace with her son's hand in one of hers, and she stopped an arm's length away, and she looked up at me with the steadiness that had felled me in a sick room 7 years before, and she said, "I have 3 conditions." "Name them," I said. "Name 100. 3 will do." She held up one finger. "I do not stop being a healer, not for a crown, not for anyone. I will heal your court and your low villages the way I healed this coast, and no steward will ever again try to pay me and send me home." "The Silvermark would be honored," I said. "It has been the poorer without you, I most of all." 2, a second finger. "Graymere is mine, I built it, I will not abandon it. There will be a healer here after me, trained by me. And I will come north to this coast every year of my life, and so will Bram, because this is where he was born and these are his people too, and no king's hall erases that. Then I will build the road to it, I said. So the coast that kept my mate and raised my son is a 2-day ride from my hall and not a 2-week one, and I will come north with you every year until I am too old to sit a horse, and then you may carry me in a cart. The corner of her mouth moved at that, not a smile, the ancestor of a smile. It was the most hopeful thing I had seen in 7 years. And 3, she said, and here her voice changed. The steadiness held, but something under it went soft, and I understood we had arrived at the thing itself. She reached out, and for the first time since a gate torch 6 years and a coast and a whole rebuilt life ago, she took my hand. Her palm was rough with work and warm and certain in mine, and the bond behind my sternum, the thing I had carried through the dark, calling it grief, went suddenly and completely still, not the stillness of an ending, but the deep still of a thing at last arrived where it was always meant to be, a needle come to rest on north. 3, she said, you will never again call a choice something other than a choice. Not to me, not to yourself, not to that boy. When you choose me, you will know you are choosing me freely, with nothing forcing your hand, no oath, no alliance, no counselor, no child. Just because you want to. That is the only way I will have you. That is the only way I ever wanted you. Sorrel, I said, there is no oath in the world binding me now, and no alliance, and no man whispering at my table, and no need at all. Bram is already my son and my heir, whether you ever say yes or no, and I have sworn that and mean it. There is nothing forcing my hand. Nothing, and I am choosing you. I choose you. Standing on this beach in the cold, with the whole warm kingdom you named at my back, and nothing making me do it but the plain fact that you are the other end of my heart and always have been, I choose you freely, and I will go on choosing you every dawn I am given, and I will know every time that I am choosing, and I will be glad. I closed my other hand over hers. Will you have me? She was quiet a long moment, the sea wind pulling at her hair, our son looking up between us with his breath held. And then Sorrel, who had walked out my gate in tears and not looked back, who had borne my child in a storm and raised him proud and alone, who had won a coast and made a garden thrive where nothing should, who had made me earn across 3 patient years every stone of the wall I had built with one cowardly night. Sorrel smiled at me at last, the whole and open smile I had not seen in 7 years, and she said, yes, now that you've learned how to mean it. Yes. Bram gave a whoop that startled the gulls off the whole beach, and the pack wolves came bounding down the shingle at the sound of it, and my son ran to meet them laughing, and I stood on the beach where I had lost everything and been given it back doubled, holding the hand of the woman my blood had chosen and my cowardice had squandered and her strength had preserved, and I understood that I had not, in fact, watched the last of her at that gate 6 years before. I had only watched the longest part of a road that turned, at its far end, back toward me, because she was strong enough to build a life at the end of it, and merciful enough, once I had become a man worth it, to let me walk the last of it to her. We were wed on the storm coast, not in the great hall, her second condition, and I would not have had it any other way. Graymere turned out entire, the whole hard, honest coast that had sheltered her, and they cheered their healer and eyed their king and decided, cautiously, to keep him. We were wed again in the south later, so the pack could see their Luna, and they bowed to her, and she healed them, and within a year no one in the Silvermark could remember a time she had not been its heart. Bram grew into his wolf and into his crown both, and he is a better man already than his father was at his age, because he was raised by a woman who taught him that a choice is always a choice, and that a man who will not fight for what his heart has chosen against it, and that there is no oath, no duty, no clever counselor's argument worth the price of the person walking out your gate in tears. I keep 2 things on my council table now, where my father's treaty once lay. One is a small carved wolf, worn smooth by a boy's hand, that Bram gave me the day I promised to bring him south to see the pack. The other is a sprig of sorrel, dried and pressed under glass, from the garden on the bluff that had no business surviving the sea wind and thrived anyway. I look at them when I sit in judgment, when a hard choice comes and some clever, tired part of me wants to call it no choice at all. They remind me, a choice is always a choice. I nearly learned it too late. A small boy on a cold beach taught me the last of it with 4 plain words, and I will be grateful to the end of my days that I rode north to hear them, that of all the doors I ever stood in, the one that mattered most was the one my son opened, and never once let close again. I stayed on that coast a month, and Sorrel gave me nothing I had not earned, and she was right, too. The first thing I earned was the village's grievance, because it was mine and 6 years overdue. I called the reeve down to the beach the second morning. A heavy, soft-handed man named Halloran who had held the northern office through my long neglect, and I did not do it quietly in some back room where a king and his officer might come to an arrangement. I did it on the shingle in the open, with the whole of Greymere gathered at their nets pretending not to watch and watching every breath of it. "They tell me you tax the catch beyond custom," I said. Halloran spread his soft hands. He had a smooth answer ready. A man who has been stealing for years always does. "Your Grace, the roads north are hard, the crown's costs are high, and a reeve must." "Show me the ledger." The smooth answer stopped. "The ledger is at the counting house, your Grace, it would take." "Then we will walk to the counting house." We walked to the counting house. The whole beach walked with us, at a distance, the way a tide follows the moon without being told. And in the counting house I sat down with the ledger and I read it, because I am a king who reads his own ledgers. My father taught me that much, and it was the best thing he taught me, and it did not take long. The custom of the coast was 1 fish in 20 to the crown. Halloran had been taking 1 in 7 and writing down 1 in 20, and pocketing the difference these 4 years, and the difference, 4 years deep, had bought him a good horse and a better coat, and had bought the men of Greymere hungry winters. I did not shout. Shouting is for men who are not sure they will be obeyed. I closed the ledger and I said, "You have robbed my people, and you have made me a thief in my own name, which is worse, because a fisherman who is robbed knows he has been robbed, and a king who is robbed of his good name does not, until he rides 2 weeks north and reads a ledger. You are done here." I stripped him of the office in front of the elders then and there, and I named an honest man in his place, a lean old fisherman called Aldous, whom the village headmen themselves put forward, and whom I could see, by the way the others stood toward him, they trusted with their lives. I cut Greymere's levy back to custom, and then below custom for 3 years to make good the theft, and I ordered the stolen difference recovered from Halloran's good horse and better coat, and put toward a new deep well and a new boat, because the old boat was rotten and men had drowned in it. I did all of this because it was right and 6 years late. But I will not lie to you and say I was unaware of Sorrel standing at the back of the counting house with her arms folded, watching her king do justice for her coast. I was aware of it in every bone of my body. And when it was done and the elders were shaking Aldous' hand, and the village had understood all at once that the far cold edge of the Silvermark had a king again after all, I looked for her, and she was already gone, back up the bluff to her garden, and she had left without a word. But that evening a boy came running down to the inn with a covered dish, and it was a fish stew, plain and good and hot, and the boy said his mother had made too much, and I ate every drop of it sitting alone by the inn fire, and I understood that a wall 6 years high does not come down at a well in a boat, but that a woman had for the first time in 6 years sent me something warm. A man learns to read the small signs when the large ones are forbidden him. I read that stew like scripture. Bram I did not have to earn, and that was its own kind of grace and its own kind of grief. Grace, because a boy of 6 who has been told all his life that his father is a great man in the South is a boy ready to love his father on an hour's notice. Grief, because I had done nothing to deserve a readiness like that, and every gift of it was a fresh accounting of what I had missed. He appointed himself my guide the 3rd day. He came to the inn at dawn, before I had my boots on, and stood in the doorway and announced that if I was going to be here I ought to know the good tide pools, because a king from the South wouldn't know the first thing about tide pools, and it would be a shame for me to go all the way back not knowing. I agreed that it would be a shame. So I spent the morning on my knees on cold, wet rock beside my son, being shown crabs. "That one's old thief," he told me with great authority, pointing at a hermit crab. "He steals the good shells, that's Mrs. Green, she's had eggs 3 times, don't touch her." He glanced up at me sidelong, testing. "You can touch old thief, he deserves it." "I would not dream of touching Mrs. Green," I said gravely. He nodded, satisfied, and then, because a child cannot hold a thing in long, he said, not looking at me, watching the pool very hard, "Ma says you didn't know about me, that you'd have come if you'd known." "That is the truth," I said. "I would have come on foot through winter." "Why didn't she tell you?" A hard, plain, 6-year-old question with a whole world under it. I chose my words with more care than I have ever chosen words in council. "Because your mother is the proudest and best person I have ever known," I said, "and she would not make me come. She wanted a man to come to you because he wanted to, not because he was made to. She was protecting you from a father who came out of duty. She would rather have raised you alone and glad than share you with a man who was only doing what he was told. Do you understand? Bram thought about this, turning a pebble over in his fingers, the way I would later learn he thought about everything, thoroughly, and once, and then it was decided. So she was being brave, he said. Yes, I said. She has been being brave for 6 years. It is the bravest thing I have ever seen, and I have seen wars. He nodded again and put the pebble in his pocket and said, "You can hold Old Thief now if you want," which I understood to be, in the language of small boys, an offering, and I took it. And I held Old Thief, who did indeed deserve it, and my son laughed at me on the cold rocks in the wind, and I thought my chest would break with the plain, enormous joy of it. But the moment that told me what my son truly was came later that week, on the beach with the wolves. I had brought 2 pack wolves north with me, a young gray male and an old gray female called Maeve, who had run at my flank for 12 years, and had let no child, no stranger, no hand but mine near her in all that time. She was half-blind now and slow and fierce as winter, and she kept to the edge of the beach and watched the village with a flat yellow eye that made mothers pull their children close. I had told Bram to keep well away from her, and he had, for a boy, been good about it. For a boy. Then one gray afternoon I looked up from mending a strap, and Bram was sitting in the sand not 3 feet from Maeve, cross-legged, talking to her low, the way you talk to a friend. My heart stopped. I came up off the log slow and careful, my mouth already shaping the command that would call her off him. And Maeve, old, half-blind, savage Maeve, who had not let a soul near her in 12 years, got up from where she lay and walked to my son, and lay down again with her great gray head in his lap, and let out a long sigh through her nose, and closed her yellow eye and slept. Bram looked up at me with his whole face lit like sun breaking through storm cloud, and he whispered so as not to wake her, "She likes me." Yes, I managed. She does. She had never liked anyone. That was the thing I could not say to a 6-year-old with a wolf asleep in his lap. She had tolerated me and no one else on the whole earth. And she had walked to my son across a cold beach and put down her guard and her half-blind head as if she had been waiting her whole savage life for exactly him, because she had known him. The pack blood in me had called her north. The pack blood in him had called her the rest of the way. My son had the bond. He had been calling my wolves to that coast his whole small life without a word of it, the same way I had turned north at dusk for 6 years and called it grief. Sorrel had raised, alone at the cold edge of my kingdom, a wolf king's true-born son, and the wolves knew their own. I turned away so the boy would not see my face, and I found that Sorrel had come down from the bluff without my hearing, and was standing at the head of the beach with her hand pressed flat over her own mouth, watching her son sleep against the wolf that loved no one, and there were tears standing in her eyes that she was too proud to let fall, not grief this time. I knew the difference now. This was the other thing. This was 6 years of raising a child alone and wondering, in the dark, whether you had done right to keep him from the world he was born to, and seeing, all at once, on a cold beach, that the world he was born to had come and lain down at his feet and called him its own. She did not speak to me that evening, but she did not send the stew with the neighbor boy. She brought it herself and set it down, and stood in the inn doorway a moment with the sea dark behind her and said, "He's never been near that wolf before. She snaps at everyone." And I said, "She has never in her life let anyone near her but me." And Sorrel looked at me a long moment, and something in the wall shifted, not a stone falling, only settling, only the whole weight of it easing a fraction onto a different footing, and she said quietly, "He is very much yours." And I said, "He is entirely yours. Everything good in him is yours. The wolves are just the frame." And she almost smiled. She turned before I could be sure, but I have hoarded that almost for the rest of my life. The bluff garden undid me on a different day. Bram took me up to see it, his mother's garden, the pride of the coast, the green thing that thrived where the sea wind killed everything else. And he walked me down the banked rows, naming every herb in them, feverfew and comfrey and self-heal and coast time, what each was for, how you dried it, which you never gave to a woman carrying, and I stood in that wind and listened to my 6-year-old son recite the whole healer's craft in his mother's exact words, in his mother's exact order. And I understood that Sorrel had done more than keep our son alive on this coast. She had poured herself into him. Every evening of 6 years she had taught him the thing she loved, the thing she had once used to charm a tired king in a midnight sickroom, and he carried her whole in him, her knowledge and her steadiness and her plain, unshowy goodness, and I had missed the making of it. I knelt down in the herb rows and I wept, and Bram patted my shoulder with enormous 6-year-old gravity and said, "It's all right. Lots of people cry at the garden. Ma says it's the wind. It was not the wind. But I let him think it was, because it is a kindness to let a child believe he has explained his father's grief. And the thing that turned the coast entire, that turned the wary village into people who would, in the end, cheer their king, came on a night near the end of the month when the sea rose. It came up fast and black out of the northwest, the way the storm coast storms do, and a boat was still out, old Corwin's boat, with Corwin and his 2 grown sons in it, and it came in broken, half-swamped, driven onto the rocks below the bluff, and the whole village went down to the water with ropes and lanterns in the screaming wind. I went with them. I am a king, but I am also a man with a wolf's strength in his arms, and there is a rope to be hauled, and I hauled it. We got Corwin and 1 son off the rocks alive. The other son, the younger, a boy barely 20, came off the rocks not alive seeming at all, blue and still and full of the sea, and the village keened over him in the lantern light, and I thought him gone. Sorrel did not think him gone. Sorrel came down the shingle at a dead run with her satchel and her hair whipping loose, and she dropped to her knees over that drowned boy, and she went to work, turning him, driving the sea out of him with the heels of her hands, breathing her own breath into him, ordering the world around her in a voice that cut clean through the storm. "You," she said to me, the Alpha King, kneeling in the surf, "hold his head. There, don't let it move." And I held his head. I did exactly as she told me, a king taking orders from a healer with dirt under her nails and the sea running off her. And I have knelt on my own throne dais with a crown coming down onto my head, and felt less like I was where I was meant to be than I felt in that freezing surf holding a drowned boy's head still, because Sorrel told me to. He coughed. He heaved up half the sea, and he coughed, and he lived, and the village made a sound I will never forget, and Sorrel sat back on her heels in the surf, spent, drenched, shaking, and looked across the boy's coughing body at me holding his head. And for one moment, one in the lantern light in the wind, before the walls came back up, she looked at me the way she had looked at me in a sick room 7 years before. Just for a moment. Then Corwin's wife was on her, weeping, and the village was around her, and the moment was gone. But it had happened. I had felt the wall, for one moment in the surf, simply not be there. I rode back to the inn near dawn, and I turned my face to the dark shape of her cottage on the bluff, as I had turned north for 6 years, and for the first time the thing behind my sternum was not grief. It was hope, tied at both ends to something living, and pulling me not away into the dark, but toward a warm window on a bluff. And I understood that I would spend the rest of my life earning the right to walk up to that window, and that I would consider it the best spent life a man ever lived. Then I rode south, and I dealt with Caddoc, and I will tell you exactly how, because it made me the king I am now. I did not send for him privately. I had learned, at a counting house on a cold beach, the value of doing justice in the open. I called the full council, every elder, every officer, the men who had sat at that table with Caddoc for 40 years, and trusted the beam over their heads without ever looking up at it, as I had. And I laid it all before them in order, the way you lay evidence and not accusation. The treaty, time to trap me before I could unmake it. The inquiries I had sent north in the 2nd year that had died on the road, and the road warden's own logs, which I had ridden home and pulled myself, showing those inquiries received and answered, and the answers rooted to Caddoc's desk and no further. And last, the letter. Sorrel's letter, the one she had paid a merchant to put into the king's own hand, the one whose non-answer had near broken what the parting hadn't. I had traced the merchant. He lived yet an old man now, and he remembered a healer on the north coast. A good fee, a letter for the king, delivered to the hold, handed to the chief counselor himself, who had thanked him and said he would see it reach the king's hand. It had reached no hand but Caddoc's. I put it to him plainly, in front of them all. You took a letter meant for me, a letter that told me my son lived. You burned it, and you let a woman on the coast believe I had read of my own child and turned away. Do you deny it? He could have denied it. The merchant was old, the logs could be argued. A lesser man in his place would have wept and denied and thrown himself on my mercy. But Caddoc had spent 40 years certain he alone knew how to keep the silver mark safe, and a man that's certain would rather be condemned than admit he was ever wrong. He rose, an old man, straight-backed, and he did not deny it. He owned it not as a crime, but as a duty. I burned it, he said to the whole silent hall. Yes, I burned it as I timed the treaty, as I stopped your inquiries, and I would do all of it again. You were a king ruled by his heart, and a king ruled by his heart is a kingdom waiting to burn. Your father knew it. Your father built the peace with that alliance, and I was left to keep it after him, and I kept it against a common healer who would have unmade it, and against a young king too soft to see the danger. I saved the silver mark from you, Wreath. I have no shame in it. do what you will. The hall waited for me to have him killed. I could see them waiting for it. It would have been just by the old reckoning and easy, and it was in me, standing there with my son's stolen years in my hands. The wish was in me. I let it pass through me, and I let it go. Because his death would have made him what he had spent 40 years making himself in his own mind. A martyr to his own certainty, a loyal man cut down by a king ruled by his heart. His death would have proven his story true, and I would not give him that. More than that, killing a man is the answer of a king who is still, underneath, afraid. I was done being afraid. You did not save the Silvermark, I said. You made it poorer and called it safer, which is the oldest lie a frightened man tells himself. The alliance you murdered my happiness to keep dissolved on its own within the year, peacefully, because the woman I was pledged to had the courage you lacked, and the courage I lacked, and refused a match her heart said no to. You burned my son's first 6 years for a treaty a braver soul than either of us tore up in a season. That is your legacy, not peace, 6 years. I let that sit in the silence. Then I gave my judgment. You are stripped of your office and your seat and every authority in this pack before this whole council, and the crime is named plainly so no man mistakes it for loyalty. You deceived your king, severed a true bond, and hid the living heir of the Silvermark. You will never again set foot in Thornhollow, nor hold any office in this pack or its lands. I saw him brace then for the Sell or the Snow, and I did not give him either. I am settling on your holding in the southern hills, I said, with an income sufficient to live your years out in dignity, and you will go to it alive, and you will trouble no one, and you will die old in a warm house. Not because you have earned my mercy, you have not, but because your death would teach this pack that a king answers his own wounds with blood, and I mean to teach them something else. I mean to teach them that a king can name a wrong, and end the power to do it again, and still leave a man his life. That is not weakness. My father would have called it weakness. My father was wrong about a great many things, and he taught them all to you, and I am unlearning them one at a time. Go. He went. He lived out his years in those hills, I am told, and grew very old, and never once to the end understood that the kingdom he had spent 40 years keeping had been made smaller, not safer, by the very act he was proudest of. There is no lonelier man than the one who cannot see why he is alone. That was punishment enough. I have never regretted the mercy. I have come to believe mercy is not the absence of justice. It is justice with the cruelty taken out, which is the harder thing to give and the kinglier. And the council, when it was done, did not think me weak. I saw it in their faces. They had watched a king read his own ledgers, and pull his own road logs, and trace his own merchant, and lay out a truth instead of a rage, and end a great man's power without spilling his blood. And they understood, all of them at once, that the soft young king who had let a counselor lead him by the nose was gone, and that the man who had ridden north after a herring tax had come back someone harder to lead and better to follow. I had lost Sorrel by being a man who could be managed. I got the Silvermark in the end by ceasing to be one. The two things were the same lesson. It only took me 6 years and a cold beach to learn it. Sorrel did not come south that first year, nor the second, and I did not ask her to. I went north instead, every season, through the pine country to the storm coast, as I had sworn on the beach I would, whatever her answer ever proved to be. The first thing I built was the road. I had told her I would, and I did a true road, wide and drained and bridged from the pine country down to Graymere, so that the 2-week ride became a 2-day one, so that the coast that had kept my mate and raised my son was no longer the forgotten cold edge of my kingdom, but a place a king could reach in 2 days and did every season without fail. The building of it did more than shorten a journey. It told that whole coast in stone that their king meant to keep coming, that Graymere was not a place he had visited once out of guilt, but a place he had bound to his heart with a road. The village watched the road come south to north over 2 years and understood the message in it, and by the end of it, they had stopped watching their king warily and started, cautiously, to keep him. And season by season, I watched my son grow, and I watched a wall come down one settled stone at a time, not because I pushed at it, but because I had stopped being the man who built it, and I stayed stopped, season after season, until Sorrel came to believe the change was not a performance for a month, but the shape of a man for good. Bram's wolf came in his 8th year. I was there for it by grace, a winter visit, snow on the bluff, and the boy took a fever that was not a fever, the deep ache in the bones that every wolf-born child takes when the wolf first stirs in them. And Sorrel, who had healed half a coast but had never seen this because she was no wolf and had raised him alone, went white with a fear she could not name. But I knew it. I sat with my son through the long night of it, and I told him what was happening in his blood, and near dawn he shifted for the first time, a half-grown gray wolf pup where my boy had been, wobbling on new legs on the cottage floor, terrified and astonished, and old Maeve, who had come north with me and never left the coast after, who was near the end of her long life by then, lifted her gray head from the hearth and looked at the pup that was my son, and thumped her tail once on the floor, and put her head back down, satisfied, as if she had only been waiting to see it before she let herself grow old. She died that spring. She had waited for him. The wolves know their own. And Sorrel, watching her son be a wolf pup on her own hearth, watching the old wolf claim him and let go, understood at last, all the way down, a thing she had feared for 8 years, that the world Bram was born to was not a world she had wrongly kept him from, but a world that had been waiting to receive him with love, and that his father was the door to it, and that the door was standing open and had been standing open patiently for years, asking nothing. The wall came down for good on an ordinary evening in the 3rd autumn, and it came down not with a grand word but with a small one. I had done my season's rounds with her, carried her satchel, learned the new troubles of the coast, and at the end of the day, as I made to walk back down to the inn as I always did, she said, not looking at me, banking the fire, "You could stay for supper. There's enough. It's a long, cold walk to the inn." 3 years I had walked that cold walk without complaint, and she offered me her fire and her table and her son across it, the plain, warm, ordinary thing, and I understood that a wall 6 years in the building had come down at last, quietly over a banked fire with the smallest door in it swinging open. I stayed for supper. I stayed for many suppers after. I did not push at what the suppers might become. I had learned, finally, the one thing I had never known as a younger king: how to want something with my whole heart and still leave the choosing of it entirely to another, and wait, and be content in the waiting, because the waiting itself was a kind of love, maybe the truest kind, the kind I had failed to give her at a gate 6 years before. It was Bram, in the end, who opened the last door the way he had opened the first. It was the close of that 3rd autumn, and I was leaving the coast for the season, and Bram, grown tall now, wolf-eyed, sturdy, stood on the shingle where he had first marched up to me and demanded to know if I was his father, and he did not want me to go. And he turned to his mother with the terrible, plain honesty of a child who has run out of patience with the grown and their slow hearts, and he asked her the question all my patience and all her healing years had circled and never landed. Why can't we just go with him? Why do we live where it's cold and far when he has a whole warm kingdom and he's built the road, and he comes every season, and you smile now when the road word says he's coming? Don't think I haven't seen it. Don't you love him? He loves you. Everyone on this whole coast can see it. They talk about it. Even Aldous talks about it. So why is it hard? Why do you make it hard? And Sorrel looked at me over our son's head, across that gray beach where I had lost her and found her, and I watched her decide at last to stop making it hard. Not because a child had shamed her, she was past shaming, she had earned the right to make any man on earth wait a lifetime, but because she had, over 3 patient seasons, at last come to believe the answer to the boy's other question. He loves you. Everyone can see it. She had needed to be sure it was real and not a month's remorse. She had every right in the world to need to be sure, and she was finally sure. She did not run into my arms. That was never her way, and I would not have believed it if she had. She walked to me across the shingle at her own pace, her son's hand in one of hers, and she stopped an arm's length from me, and she looked up at me with the steadiness that had felled me in a sick room 9 years before, and she said, "I have 3 conditions." "Name them," I said. "Name 100. 3 will do." She held up one finger. "I do not stop being a healer, not for a crown, not for a hall, not for anyone. I will heal your court and your low villages the way I healed this coast, and no steward will ever again try to pay me and send me home like hired help." "The silver mark would count itself honored," I said. "It has been the poorer for want of you, and I most of all. There is a place at my council table for the realm's healer, and it will be yours, and no man will move you from it while I live. 2, a second finger. Greymere is mine. I built it out of nothing in the teeth of that wind, and I will not abandon it to be a hall's ornament. There will be a healer on this coast after me, trained by my own hand, and I will come north every year of my life, and so will Bram, because this is where he was born and these are his people, and no southern crown erases that. Then the road I built stands," I said, "and I will come north on it with you every year until I am too old to sit a horse, and after that you may bring me in a cart, and Greymere will be as much the crown's heart as Thornhollow is, because it is where the crown's heart was kept safe when I was fool enough to let it go. The corner of her mouth moved at that, not a smile yet, but its near ancestor, and it was the most hopeful thing I had seen in 9 years. And 3, here her voice changed. The steadiness held, but under it something went soft, and I knew we had come to the thing itself. She reached out, and for the first time since a gate torch and a coast and a whole rebuilt life ago, she took my hand, her palm rough with work and warm and certain in mine, and the thing behind my sternum that I had carried 6 years through the dark, calling it grief, went suddenly and wholly still. Not the stillness of an ending. The deep still of a compass needle come to rest on north, of a thing arrived at last where it was always meant to be. 3, she said, you will never again call a choice something other than a choice, not to me, not to yourself, not to that boy. The night at the gate you told me you had no choice, and I told you to your face you were choosing, and you were, and it took you 6 years and your own son on this beach to become a man honest enough to say so. So this is my last condition, and it is the only one that ever mattered. When you choose me, you will know you are choosing me freely, with nothing on this earth forcing your hand. No oath, no alliance, no dead father's wish, no counselor at your ear. Not even this child who is already yours and would be yours whatever I answer. Nothing forcing you, only that you want to. That is the only way I will ever have you, Wreath. That is the only way I ever wanted you from the very first. Sorrel, I said, and my voice was not steady, and I did not try to make it so. There is no oath in the world binding me now, no alliance. No father whispering from his grave, no counselor whispering at my table. I sent the counselor to the hills and buried the whispering with him. And there is no need forcing my hand, none, because Bram is my son and my named heir already, sworn before the whole council, whether you say yes to me tonight or turn me away and make me ride south alone. There is nothing making me do this. Nothing at all. I closed my other hand over hers, both my hands around hers, the way you hold the one warm thing on a cold coast. And I am choosing you. I choose you. Standing on this beach in the cold with the whole warm kingdom you named at my back, and every reason of state satisfied, and nothing on this earth compelling me but the single plain fact that you are the other end of my own heart and have been since a midnight sick room 9 years gone. I choose you freely, knowing I choose you, and I will go on choosing you every dawn I am given breath, and I will know every single dawn that I am choosing, and I will be glad of the knowing. Will you have me? Not the king. Me. The man who finally learned what you tried to teach him at a gate. She was quiet a long moment, the sea wind pulling her hair loose, our son between us with his breath held and his hand tight in hers. And then Sorrel, who had walked out my gate in tears and never once looked back, who had borne my son in a fisherman's cottage in a winter storm and raised him proud and alone, who had won a whole hard coast and made a garden thrive where nothing green should live, who had refused to bind me with a child, and refused to be paid off, and refused to make it easy, and made me earn, across 3 patient years, every single stone of the wall I had built in one cowardly hour. Sorrel smiled at me. The whole smile, the open one, the one I had not been given in 9 years and had stopped daring to hope for. Yes, she said, now that you've learned how to mean it, yes, Wreath. I'll have you. Bram let out a whoop that startled every gull off the whole beach, and the pack wolves came bounding down the shingle at the sound of it, and my son ran to meet them laughing, wolf-eyed, wholly himself, and I stood on the beach where I had lost everything and had it given back to me doubled, holding the hand of the woman my blood had chosen and my cowardice had squandered and her own strength had preserved through 6 years of wind, and I understood finally and fully that I had not, in fact, watched the last of her at that gate. I had only watched the longest part of a road that turned, at its far end, back toward me, because she was strong enough to build a whole life at the far end of it. And merciful enough, once I had become a man worth the mercy, to let me walk the last of it home to her. We were wed on the storm coast, not in the great hall, her second condition, and I would not have had it any other way. Graymere turned out entire, the whole hard, honest coast that had sheltered her when her king had failed her, and they cheered their healer and eyed their king and decided at last and for good to keep him. We were wed again in the south after, so the pack could see their Luna, and they bowed to her, not because a king commanded it, but because within a year of her coming south there was not a family in the low villages she had not healed, not a child she had not sat beside, and the pack that might once have scorned a healer of no rank bowed to her freely, the way you bow to something you have come to love. Within 2 years, no one in the Silvermark could remember a time she had not been its heart. Within 3, no one tried. Bram grew into his wolf and into his crown both, and he is already, at the age he is now, a better man than his father was at that age. because he was raised the first and best 6 years by a woman who taught him, before he could even name it, that a choice is always a choice, that a man who will not fight for what his heart has chosen has, by his silence, chosen against it, and that there is no oath, no duty, no clever and frightened counselor's argument in all the world worth the price of the person walking out your gate in tears. He will be a king who knows that in his bones. I had to learn it at 50 on a cold beach from a 6-year-old. He has known it since before he could speak, because his mother is who she is. I keep 2 things on my council table now, where my father's blood-sworn treaty used to lie. The first is a small carved wolf, worn smooth by a boy's hand, the one Sorrel told Bram to take up to the cottage the day I came, the one he was holding when he asked her why the king was sad. He gave it to me the day I promised to bring him south to see the pack, and I have kept it on the table ever since. The second is a sprig of sorrel, dried and pressed under glass, from the garden on the bluff that had no business surviving the sea wind and thrived there anyway, green and stubborn and alive, exactly as she is, exactly as she always was. I look at the 2 of them when I sit in judgment, when a hard matter comes before me, and some clever, tired, well-managed part of me, the part that sounds so much like a counselor and so much like my father, begins to whisper that this is no choice at all, that my hand is forced, that a king must simply do the hard necessary thing and call it duty and feel nothing. I look at the carved wolf and the pressed green sprig, and I remember. A choice is always a choice. I nearly learned it too late. I nearly lost to a lie a frightened man told me, and I was too hollow to refuse. The only 2 things I have ever made that mattered, the woman on the bluff and the boy on the beach. A small boy taught me the last of it, on a cold shingle at the edge of my own kingdom, with 4 plain words and no idea in the world what they were worth. Are you my father? I will be grateful to the last hour I breathed that I rode north after a herring tax to hear them. That of all the doors I ever stood in as a king, the one that mattered past all the others was not a gate I let a woman walk out of, but a door my own son opened, on a beach in the wind, and then took my hand in his small, stubborn hand and would not for anything let close again.